but some of you might be looking for, maybe you want a little data right now, all right? So let me give you a little bit of data. Several years ago, we did a study on the effects of creative problem-solving training on the communication behaviors that occur in small groups. Because we believe it's the small group, the team, the task force, yes, the committee, that's the building block of organizations. It's in the small group when new ideas are generated, and in many cases where new ideas die. And so in this study, we compared students that were trained in creative problem-solving with students that were not trained in creative problem-solving. We gave them a real, live business problem to solve, and then we videotaped them while they solved the problem. When we analyzed the videotapes, this is what we found. We found that the groups that were trained in creative problem-solving participated significantly more. They got more involved in the process of problem-solving. They criticized ideas significantly less. They supported ideas significantly more. They laughed significantly more. They smiled significantly more. And bottom line, did they generate more ideas? Yes, over 2 to 1. Now you say, it looks great. Looks like they had a good time. Looks like they got involved in the process. But hey, what were the quality of those ideas like? Well, when we gave the ideas back to the business experts that gave us the problem to work on in the first place and had them analyze the ideas for quality, here's what we found. We found that the groups that were trained in creative problem solving outproduced the untrained groups on high quality of ideas by about 3 to 1. 618 excellent ideas to 281 excellent ideas. Now, if you follow that along, you'll also find that the groups that were trained in creative problem solving also outproduced the untrained groups in low quality of ideas as well. Conclusion? When you're using a high-powered technique like brainstorming or other techniques that you're learning this week to generate ideas, you also need high-powered structured techniques to sort and to refine and to develop those ideas. And that's what techniques like pluses and potentials and concerns is all about. But the intriguing part of this data is the competitive advantage. Because in the same amount of time it took an untrained group to come up with 281 ideas, a trained group came up with at least 300 more good ideas to choose from. And by the way, they had a much better time doing it. Right? Okay. So how do you generate those ideas? How do you come up with those options? Well, I'm going to give you some guidelines, and these guidelines are very familiar to you. First guideline is to defer judgment, no criticism. Second guideline is to strive for quantity. Third guideline is to freewheel, go for those wild ideas. And the fourth guideline is to combine and improve and build on other ideas. Now, as you know, deferring judgment is probably the most important guideline to keep in mind when you're generating ideas. But what deferring judgment asks us to do is to unlearn some of the usual ways that we've been taught to think about an idea. Because from a very early age, we've been taught that as soon as we thought of an idea, we immediately needed to judge whether it was right or wrong or good or bad or safe or unsafe. But in generating new ideas and new ways to solve problems, we need to hold off our judgment for a time until we come up with a number of ideas to choose from. What we often tend to do is we tend to confuse ideas with actions. Ideas are not actions. They're potential actions we might take later. By the way, this is not what we mean by deferring judgment. That's a pretty stupid idea, Don. I'm afraid I'm going to have to kill you. Not deferring judgment. All right. Okay. There's nothing more dangerous than a new idea when it's the only one you have. Right? Which leads us to our next guideline, which is strive for quantity. People ask us, how many ideas do you have to come up with to get a good one? Do you have to come up with hundreds and hundreds of ideas to get a breakthrough? And the answer to that question is it depends on the kinds of ideas that you're looking for. Now, if you want to significantly redefine your business or your life, you're going to need a lot more ideas than if you want to make some incremental improvement over a process or a procedure or a system that already exists. But one of the things that we found helpful to do is to set an idea quota or an idea goal. Now, when we set the quota at about 50 ideas with a well-defined problem statement, like you have when you're done with problem finding, and then analyze the ideas, here's how the ideas shook out. We found that about the first 15 ideas were the usual ideas. These are the ideas that people had thought of before. Now, from idea 15 to 30 or 35, the more unusual ideas began to surface. Now, those unusual, kind of crazy, goofy ideas were important because they helped to form the more sophisticated and unusual idea combinations that occurred later on in the process. Incidentally, if you hit your idea quota and you're really moving, let yourself go, you'll be real pleased with the ideas that you get after that quota. But the key learning here is if you're sitting around and you're generating ideas for solving a problem and you're coming up with 10 or 15 of them and you think you're getting real creative, you're not. All you're doing is getting those ideas out that are already rumbling around in people's heads. The creativity comes in the stretch. The innovation comes in the stretch. Right? Oh, and by the way, this guideline helps you to deal with fear. All right? One of the things that we found when we did some research on this for the book, Leading on the Creative Edge, which happens to be in the bookstore, and the bookstore will be open at 10 o'clock tonight, and I'll sign those books for you. Was that a subtle sales pitch or what? Is that fear is a perceived lack of options, and creativity gives you options. So by striving for quantity, you can come up with a lot more options, because what we find is that when we're in fearful situations, we usually think of 1 or 2 options. When you stretch beyond that, you can come up with much better options and alleviate that fear factor. Next guideline, free will. The wilder the idea, the better. Alex Osborne, the inventor of brainstorming, said it's much easier to tame down a wild idea than it is to invigorate a weak one. We like to use the analogy that it's much easier to tame a tiger than it is to make a pussycat wild. So this week, when you're generating ideas, we want you to go for those big lion ideas. Final guideline, deliberately combine, improve, and build on other ideas. Let one idea spur another idea and spur another idea. And here's a powerful example of building on other ideas. There's been a lot of builds on that idea. When we were doing some research on the book and looking at the book, one of the people that I collaborated on writing with said, Roger, what are the key points for what you're trying to talk about? And we distilled it down